Hello, my dear students and um, friends. Welcome back to my next lecture, that is protected area and its network in India. So today we will be talking about the protected area and its network in India. We have been talking about biodiversity and its conservation. When we are talking about the biodiversity, definitely we have to think about its conservation also. So we have already done the biodiversity. What is the biodiversity? The number and variety of the flora and fauna on the earth is the biodiversity, and it is important because we want to create gene pool, and there are other important things we have already discussed. There are major threat to the biodiversity like habitat degradation, habitat clearance, poaching, urbanization. So the biodiversity is on threat. To protect the biodiversity, we have to do the biodiversity conservation. So biodiversity conservation are of two types. One is the in situ biodiversity conservation and there is the ex situ conservation. So in situ conservation means inside its natural habitat. If we want to protect any species, we have to, the priority of is to protect the species in its natural habitat where it is actually living in. Ex situ conservation is outside the natural habitat but creating the more or less same kind of habitat. So basically in situ conservation is conservation and protection of biodiversity in its natural habitat, while ex situ conservation is conservation for selected rare plants and animal outside their habitat. Outside doesn't mean in the enclosure or something. Outside means creating the more or less same environment. So in situ is help in recovering population, helping them to develop their distinct feature, that is in situ conservation, and ex situ help in recovering population in order to prevent their extinction. We want to protect these species because each and every species is environment for us, and we want to protect all of them from the extinction because every species existing on the earth is very, very important. We are getting lots of medicine, lots of products even from plants, everything, whether it's a food plant, whether it's meat or whether it's oxygen, everything you name, we are surrounded is coming from the environment. And environment is, biodiversity is the part of the environment. So we have to, for our sustenance, to survive ourselves, we have to protect the biodiversity. So in situ means it is done in the natural environment. Ex situ conservation can be done by creating more or less similar environment or habitat for animal as well as for the plants, for both. The examples of the ex situ conservation are the national park, wildlife sanctuary, community reserves, conservation reserves, and there are many centrally sponsored schemes within these areas like Project Tiger, Project Rhino. So there are certain species which need extra attention because of the population loss. So in that way, apart from these four categories, that is the National Park, Wildlife Sanctuary, Community Reserve, Conservation Reserve, as per the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, there are centrally sponsored schemes which protect the particular species out of the threat. Part of ex situ conservation is about the zoology park, botanical garden, seed banks. There are many examples of the ex situ conservation. Conservation when we are not able to conserve the species in its natural habitat. So what we do, we bring the species safely in different area, creating more or less same environment, and then we are protecting. So it could be zoological park, it could be for the plants, it could be the botanical garden, seed banks and all. So we'll be taking up one by one. So this protected area network, they are the location which receive protection because of their recognition, natural, ecological and or cultural values. So there are something very important for that area. That is why we want to protect, the government want to protect those area. Maybe it could be species, it could be the species of animal, it could be species of plant, it could be whole biodiversity, it could be the landscape. So that is the, when we the species, the area is having something very important, something very important related to the biodiversity, we try to protect this. So designate with the objective of conserving biodiversity. The total number of protected area recorded in January 2024 release of the World Database of Protected Area WDPA is 2,95,584, comprising 2,83,582 polygons and 12,002 points and covering 244 countries and territories. So there are it's not only in India, throughout the world there are different protected areas, they have different categories, and we have to protect for the conservation of biodiversity. Until now we have protected around 2,95,584 protected areas. Currently, out of making so much of effort, still we have just 15% of land and freshwater and 8.1% of the oceans, they are protected. Still we have more to protect. There are different species to be protected. So this is the map which is showing whatever we have discussed in our last slide. This is the map showing the locations and the density of the protected areas in different part of the world. So currently almost 5.7% of the land and freshwater and 15.7% of land and freshwater and 8.1% of the oceans are protected in different categories of the protected areas. Come to the India, India is also very active for the conservation. If it is the issue of the environment, India is very active and actively participating in the conservation area, but especially biodiversity conservation. For the biodiversity conservation, we have created many national parks, sanctuaries, many protected areas. So India's conservation planning is based on the philosophy of identifying and protecting representative wild habitats across all ecosystem. We have different kind of ecosystem, whether it's ecosystem as well as landscape. We have hills, we have seas, we have oceans, we have grasslands, we have woodlands. So different kind of habitat across the ecosystem. So our aim to protect each and every habitat, each and every ecosystem. So a network of 1014 protected area has been established till now. Till November 2023, we have established 1014 protected areas covering an area about 1,75,169 kilometer square, that is 5.32% of the total geographical area. It comprises the 1014 protected area comprises 106 national parks, 573 wildlife sanctuaries, 15 conservation reserve and 220 community reserve. This is the data as per the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Invest Center situated at the Wildlife Institute of India collect this data, keep this data, keep updating these data. So apart from these designated protected areas, we have many, we have already discussed, we have, apart from the protected area, we have the centrally sponsored scheme. So apart from the protected area, we have centrally sponsored scheme like 54 tiger reserves and 33 elephant reserves and many more we have. Okay, so there are 4 kind of protected area: national park, wildlife sanctuary, conservation reserve and community reserve. We will be discussing all 4 one by one with the example, what are the criteria of declaring area as a national park, what are the criteria, under what act we declare all these area, what are the amendment in the act. So everything we will be discussing one by one. So at present we have 106 national park, 573 wildlife sanctuary, 115 conservation reserve and almost 220 community reserve. So this is the total percent geographical area in India is protected is 5.32%. Total 114 protected areas. So national park, we already have a legislation, an act. That act is Wildlife Protection Act. So this act was formed in 1972, and under this act there are provisions. There are provisions to protect the different areas as the protected areas. So there are different provisions to protect national parks, sanctuary, community reserve, and conservation reserve. Within the this national park, within the Wildlife Protection Act, there are different sections. So we declare the national park under section 35 of Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Whenever it appears to the state government that an area, whether within a sanctuary or not, is by reason of its ecological, faunal, floral, geomorphological or zoological association or importance, needed to be constituted as a national park for the purpose of protecting, propagating or developing wildlife therein or its environment, it may by notification declaring its intention to constitute such area as a national park. So, under section 35 or Wildlife Protection Act, the government can show its intention to declare any important area as a national park. That is under section 35. National park can be declared both by the central government as well as by state government. State government alone cannot do anything, nor the central government alone can do. This is the mutual consensus. They decide and they declare any area as a protected area. Since every area comes under any one state, so state government is actively involved in this. So the national park is declared for the purpose of protecting, propagating or developing wildlife or its environment. Protecting, propagating or developing wildlife or its environment. Private ownership is not allowed in national park. While in sanctuary it is allowed. We will be coming down to the sanctuary. In national park, private ownership is not allowed, as well as activities like forestry, grazing or cultivation are not permitted. No rights are allowed on land and their resources. No human rights are allowed on lands and their resources. So national park is it's a human free zone. No altercation of the boundaries of a national park shall be made except on a resolution passed by the state legislature. Once the national park is declared, like under section 35, government can show its intention to declare any area as a national park. So once it is declared, the boundaries cannot be altered. In case if it is necessary to alter, the resolution has to be passed by the state legislatures. Corbett National Park, among the national park, the Corbett National Park was the first national park established in 1936 as the Haley National Park. In 1970, India had only 5 national parks. In 1972, India enacted the Wildlife Protection Act and Project Tiger in 1973 to safeguard the habitat of conservation reliant species, and currently there are 106 national parks in India. Further legislation strengthening protection for wildlife was introduced in 1980s. So this is the legislation, Wildlife Protection Act. Time to time the government make amendment as per the requirement, as per the need of the people, as per the need of the law. They keep on doing the amendments in Wildlife Protection Act. So this was enacted, the Wildlife Protection Act was enacted in 1972, and under this the areas, the government can show its intention to declare any area as a protected area. So before the Wildlife Protection Act, there were 5 national parks, and Corbett National Park, which is also known as the Jim Corbett National Park, whose earlier name was the Haley National Park, was the first national park declared in India. So at present there are 106 existing national parks in India, covering an area about 44,402.95 km square, which is 1.35% of the geographical area of the country. This is the national database. This data is collected from the National Wildlife Database Center in November 2023. So till November 2023, there are 106 existing national park in India. There are various out of 106. Some important national park are the Corbett National Park, Dudhwa National Park, Gir National Park, that is in the Gujarat, that is the only home for the Asiatic lion, Sariska Park, and the Panna Tiger Reserve or Panna National Park. Panna and Sariska are very, very important. When we will be discussing about the Project Tiger, we will be highlighting the story of the Sariska as well as Panna National Park, because these are the two areas where when the government did the census of the tiger, we found that no tigers are left. So there were further amendment was made in Wildlife Protection Act. So this is all about the national park. So national park, no human activity is allowed. In emergency cases, only if the boundaries has to be altered, that has to be through the proper legislations. No human activity is allowed. Only the chief wildlife warden can give the permit for the researchers for the research work to work inside the protected areas. That's it. Now come to the wildlife sanctuary. Again, the wildlife sanctuary is one of the category of the protected area declared by the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Sanctuary, national park, the government can show its intention to declare any area as a national park under section 35. Now, under section 18 of Wildlife Protection Act 1972, the government can show its intention to declare any area as a sanctuary. So the definition as per the Wildlife Protection Act, the state government may by notification declare its intention to constitute any area other than an area comprised within any reserve forest of the territorial waters as a sanctuary, if it considered that such area is of adequate ecological, faunal, floral, geomorphological, natural or zoological significance for the purpose of protecting, propagating or developing wildlife or its environment. The certain rights of people living inside the sanctuary could be permitted with the permission of Chief Wildlife Warden. So the difference between the wildlife sanctuary and the national park is that we have to settle down all the issues before the final notification of the national park. There is no human activity after declaration of the national park. In case of the wildlife sanctuary, the sanctuary can be declared, the area can be declared as a sanctuary and all the settlements can be resolved later on. All the issues can be resolved later on. So the national park is having the higher conservation priority. Further, during the settlement of claim, before finally notifying the sanctuary, the collector may, in consultation with the Chief Wildlife Warden, allow the continuation of any right of any person in or over any land within the limit of the sanctuary. This is what just we discussed. So at present, there are 573 existing wildlife sanctuary, that is 1,23,762.56 km square, which is 3.76% of the geographical area of the country. 3.76, and national park just 1 point something area, geographical area for the country. So sanctuaries area is, as compared to national park, is more. And among the sanctuaries, there are some important sanctuaries. Run of Kutch Wildlife Sanctuary is the largest wildlife sanctuary. Katarnia Ghat Wildlife Sanctuary, Binsar Wildlife Sanctuary, that is in Uttaranchal, Askot Wildlife Sanctuary. So like this, we have many wildlife sanctuary. We have 573 wildlife sanctuary. So this is about the national park and the sanctuaries. Then in 2002, Wildlife Protection Act was amended and 2 more categories were included. Apart from the national park and wildlife, 2 different categories of protected areas, the conservation reserve and community reserve, were added through Wildlife Protection Amendment Act 2002. In 2002, it was added. So conservation reserve and community reserves are terms used to describe protected area in India that serve as buffer zone connectors and migration corridors between established national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and reserved and protected forest. So this could be the corridor between the two PS, two national park and sanctuaries. So these categories were added because of reduced protection in and around existing or proposed protected areas due to private ownership of land and land use. So these categories were added because of reduced protection in and around existing or proposed protected areas due to private ownership or land and land use. Now come to the conservation reserve. Conservation reserve, like this is again as per the Wildlife Protection Act 1972 under section 36A. So under section 36A, conservation reserve, the state government, after having consultation with the local communities, declare any area owned by the government, particularly the area adjacent to national park and sanctuaries and those areas which link one protected area with another, as conservation reserve for protecting landscape, seascape, flora and fauna and their habitat. The protection of national park and sanctuary were high. They were the high degree of protection. So to declare any area as a national park and sanctuary was a bit difficult because we have to do lots of formality, government formalities, lots of surveys and all. We have to settle down the issues of the people, then only we can. So it is not a easy process. There are certain areas which need protection but not as much as the national park and sanctuaries need. The government introduced two more categories of the protected area, conservation reserve and conservation community reserve. So 36A is about the conservation reserve. Section 36B(1). The state government shall constitute a conservation reserve management committee to advise the chief wildlife warden to conserve, manage and maintain the conservation reserve. For every conservation reserve, for every protected area, there is a management committee. So for the conservation reserve, there is a management committee under section 36B(1). State government shall constitute a conservation reserve management committee, and the function of the committee is to advise the chief wildlife warden to conserve, manage and maintain the conservation reserve. The committee shall, the section 36B(2), the committee shall consist of a representative of the Forest of Wildlife Department who shall be member secretary of the committee, one representative of each village panchayat in whose jurisdiction the reserve is located, 3 representatives of the non-government organizations working in the field of wildlife conservation and 1 representative each from the Department of Agriculture and Animal Husbandry. The committee shall regulate its own procedure including the quorum. So, this is the committee made to give advice to the chief wildlife warden in relation to the conservation reserve. Tirappa de Marathur Conservation Reserve near Thirunelveli district of Tamil Nadu, declared in 2005, is the first conservation reserve in the country. In 2012, Rajasthan government in India declared Javai Band forest as a conservation reserve forest. So at present, there are 115 existing conservation reserve in India, conserving an area of 5,548.75 km square, which is 0.17% of the geographical area of the country. This is as per the National Wildlife Database Center in November 2023. The 2 protected area category were added. One is the conservation reserve, which we have already covered, and second is the community reserve. Conservation reserve, the involvement of the forest department is more as compared to the community reserve. Under section 36C, conservation reserve was under section 36B. So under section 36C of Wildlife Protection Act, the government can show its intention to declare any area as a community reserve. So community reserve, the state government may, where the community or an individual has volunteered to conserve wildlife and its habitat, declare any private or community land not comprised within a national park, sanctuary or a conservation reserve as a community reserve for protecting fauna, flora and traditional or cultural conservation values of and practices. Under 36D, Community Reserve Management Committee, 36D1 says, the state government shall constitute a Community Reserve Management Committee, which shall be the authority responsible for conserving, maintaining and managing the community reserve. So, under section 36D of Wildlife Protection Act, the point 1 says the state government can constitute a committee. And second says the committee shall consist of 5 representatives nominated by the village panchayat or where such panchayat does not exist by the member of the Gram Sabha, and 1 representative of the state forest or wildlife department under whose jurisdiction the community reserve is located. So, the difference between the community reserve and conservation reserve is declared on the government land, while the community reserve is declared on the village land, maybe Gram Panchayat land or something. So, no change in land use pattern for the declaration of the community reserve. There should not be any change in land use pattern shall be made within the community reserve, except in accordance with the resolution passed by the management committee and approval of the same by the state government. The Keshavpur Milani Community Reserve in the Gurdaspur district of Punjab was the first community reserve notified in India under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. This was amended in 2002. There are 115 existing conservation reserves in India covering an area of 5,548.75 km square, which is 0.17% of the geographical area of the country. This is again, the data was collected from the National Wildlife Database Center in November 2023. So, at present we have 115 community reserve. What are the main objective of the community reserve? Declaration of the community reserve, improving the socio-economic condition of the people living in such area. In community reserve, if the people are living, because it is declared on the community land, on the Gram Panchayat land or these lands, so the rights, people rights will be same. Improving the socio-economic conditions of the people living in such areas. Conserving wildlife and diversity of the area. It provides the mechanism to provide recognition and legal backing to the community initiative effort in wildlife protection. It provides for a flexible system where the wildlife conservation is achieved without compromising the community need. So, the community as well as biodiversity both have to exist simultaneously without compromising each one's need. And these reserves are managed by the community management committee. So, the reserve is managed by the community reserve management committee. The purpose of the community reserve and the conservation reserve. So, community reserve, these areas are typically managed and protected by the local community, and sustainable use of resources may be allowed under certain guidelines. Conservation reserve. Conservation of biodiversity and maintenance of ecological balance human activities are generally restricted to activities that do not harm the environment. In both the community reserve and the conservation reserve, the human habitation can be there, but activities are bit restricted in the conservation reserve. There should not be any such activities in the conservation reserve which can harm the environment, which can harm the existing biodiversity. So, we have to take care of all these things in the conservation reserve, while the community reserve is managed by the community itself. So, community reserve, active participation and management by local community to balance conservation goals with the sustainable use of natural resources. Conservation reserve is managed by the government authorities or conservation organization with the focus on protecting and conserving natural habitat and biodiversity. So, there are different between the community reserve and the conservation reserve. Community reserve is managed by the local community, the community which is already existing living in that area, while the conservation reserve is managed by the government authorities or conservation organization with a focus of protecting and conserving natural habitat and biodiversity. So, community reserve dual focus on meeting the need of local communities and conserving natural resources. So, it is the responsibility of the community living inside the community reserve or around the community reserve to maintain the needs of the local communities as well as conserving natural resources. It has to be sustainable development, sustainable utilization of the resources. Both should be benefited from the existing resources. While the conservation reserve primarily intended for the preservation of biodiversity and ecosystem with limited human interference. Human interference is allowed in both, but in one, the people, the communities, in community reserve, the community is protecting and fulfilling their need from the community reserve, while conservation reserve, the human interference is limited. So, this is all about the protected areas categories. In Indian scenario, we have 4 different categories: national park, sanctuary, community reserve and conservation reserve. National park, sanctuary are the old status and they are more difficult, their management is more difficult. There are very strict rules, while community reserve and conservation reserve are declared at the periphery of the national park or the sanctuary for the connection of 2 corridors, or the corridors can be declared, and these 2 areas are not as, the rules of these 2 areas are not as difficult as the national park and sanctuary. In both the new categories, the community reserve and the conservation reserve, human activities are allowed. Community reserve is managed by the local community, while the conservation reserve is managed by the government organization or the conservation organization. So, this is all about the protected area management in India. Now, in our next lecture, we will be discussing about the centrally sponsored schemes by the Government of India for the protection and conservation of species. Thank you very much.